Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we'll start today's episode where we are very excited to welcome back to the show one Nikki Morrison. Nikki has been in the animal training field for over 20 years, starting off working with sea lions at the age of 19, where she established a passion for animal behaviour, training and welfare. Nikki then moved on to become animal training coordinator for a wildlife park in England, working with several species ranging from a variety of big cats, primates, small mammals and birds. She also started the UK's first sea lion swim program and internship program. After a 6-month sabbatical trip, spending time researching animal training programs around Australia, Nick went on to work with dolphins in the Caribbean for a couple of years before being asked to help start a trailblazing penguin training program in Dubai. This earned Nikki's team several international awards and recognitions and ultimately led to an offer of work as director of animal training for a worldwide zoo and aquarium consultation company. At the peak of Nikki's career, however, sadly, she gave up her role to move back home and care for her terminally ill mum. During this time, Nikki also supported re-evaluating a local sea lion facility and operation, which led to a new pool and advanced research on stereotypical behaviour in sea lions. Nikki now works with Guide Dogs for the Blind, supporting the puppy development operation in Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as running her own consulting business to continue her passion for supporting zoological facilities to integrate animal-centred training programs that positively impact zoo operations in many ways, but most importantly, the lives of the animals and their primary caretakers. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Nikki Morrison back to the show today. Nikki, thank you so much for taking time to come and hang out with us again at Animal Training Academy.
Thank you so much for having me back, Ryan. I appreciate it. I clearly did not bore you too much last time, so I'll take that as a positive to be invited back.
I can't wait for today's episode. But firstly, if you listening have not already listened to part 1, I highly encourage you to do so. You can find it as the previous episode to this one in whatever app you are listening to this on. In that episode, we had a great time learning about Nikki's journey from where she first started up until now, /2022, as well as all the fantastic projects and endeavours, including that penguin program I just mentioned in her bio that she's been involved in over the years. However, if you haven't listened to it, no worries. You are, of course, totally welcome to stay tuned into this episode and what will be an equally excellent conversation. Because today I'm super excited to talk about something that I know all the listeners of this podcast show can relate to, and that is getting stuck and hitting rough patches in your training. Times when we can potentially be left feeling overwhelmed, helpless, frustrated, and even embarrassed sometimes. As we learned in part 1, Nikki, you have worked with a vast array of different species and individuals, so no doubt you've had to develop a broad knowledge and experience base. But inevitably, you're going to come across a new behaviour, new resource constraints, a particularly challenging individual, etc., etc. The list goes on, and you're going to get stuck. And so I'm super excited to hear some stories from you about challenges just like this. And I understand you have pulled, I asked you to pull together 5, but I think you told me you pulled together 55. Let's see how we go. 5 stories of how you came up against rough patches in your training, how you overcame them, what the outcome was, and what you learned. I can't wait. Can you get us started today, please, Nikki, with your first such story?
I can. So I thought it'd be a really good start to talk about a group of gibbons that I worked with, and these were the first species outside of sea lions that gave me my first sort of spark of inspiration for animal training. So we spoke on the last episode about how it wasn't very common for other zoo species to be trained at that time. So this was back in the early, like 2005 maybe. So there was some animal training programs going on, but it certainly wasn't common, and it certainly wasn't happening in the zoo that I was at the time. And I used to walk around the zoo and I would see how some of the other species were being managed. And I just thought a lot about how much easier things were with the sea lions because they just, participated in their own daily care. So life was reasonably, quick and sort of well planned out, and we could really plan our day because manoeuvres were just slick. It wasn't really something that we had really thought about. And this is when I really started thinking about it for these other species, as well as attending lots of different conferences and seminars and seeing what other facilities were doing. That was definitely an inspiration to this as well. But the gibbons, I would see that, for example, we built a new enclosure and we were going to move the gibbons from their old enclosure to their new one. So I was just really curious as to how they were planning on doing that. And the execution was to be a group of our workmen running around the exhibit with big nets and attempting to catch these gibbons, pop them into boxes and then move them across. And it seemed like a really normal thing, in conversation. It was just like, that's just how it's done. So it sparked a lot of conversations about how it could be done and how we could improve it. And just trying to get people to, I guess, put themselves in that gibbon's shoes, and whether, if they were moving house, would they like to make that already quite stressful situation even more stressful by a kidnapper running around and trying to catch them by a net, or would they like to just maybe sit in the car and drive there? And that's basically what we could potentially do with a gibbon. So that was the start of expanding the animal training programme outside of sea lions and birds and into other species. So obviously the risks that came along with not doing this training or implementing this training was just the use of those aversive approaches. Obviously we know that they can jeopardise both the physical and mental health of the animals. And the time spent to chase gibbons around an enclosure, I wouldn't even want to think, and not to mention the risk to the staffs and the animals' health and safety. And potentially a bit of cost could come out of that as well. You might end up with vet bills or, employees claiming damages because they've been injured by a gibbon. So there was plenty of risk there that was easy enough to highlight. Some of the solutions that we implemented was to sort of redesign the inside of the exhibit by just inserting some carry boxes inside the exhibit. So getting our antecedent arrangement in there. And they were specifically designed so that we could manoeuvre them, open them and close them from outside of the exhibit, so we wouldn't need to be intrusive and inside. And inspired by, like I mentioned, the work of other people that they were doing in other zoos, we proposed that we could train these animals to get into these boxes, and we set a bit of a timeline that we thought it would potentially take, but ultimately it would be down to the gibbons that would decide how long it would take, because it was all around choice and control. So it was super simple. We just implemented the same techniques that we used with the sea lions, and we used a lot of positive reinforcement, positive association, habituation by having the carry crate inside, and obviously building up relationships as well with these animals. So we used the staff that were already there, that the animals had relationships with, and we trained them up on how to implement the training. And that meant that we could also keep it consistent and they could make it part of their daily routine. So yeah, that was super successful. We managed to move the gibbons over voluntarily, as stress reducing as we possibly could. We actually came across another situation with the gibbons when they moved to the new exhibit, that they were also having issues getting them inside and outside. So not in and out of their exhibit, but they had an indoor area and an outdoor area. And the way that they were trying to manage that was by using a hose. So trying to hose the gibbons to get inside. And inside was quite sort of danky, dungy area. Wasn't very well lit, and there wasn't really much in the way of sort of furnishings and things in there. So that was one of the first areas that we started on, was just to make that a bit more inviting, a bit brighter, a bit more gibbon friendly. And again, we done training with them just to manoeuvre them in and out of the exhibit. So not only was it obviously beneficial for the animals' well-being, it actually saved the keepers an awful lot of time. And instead of sort of two keepers having to go down there, one with a hose and one stood trying to shut the gate really quickly, it just took one person to go down, give them the cue to come inside, and yeah, they could implement that really, really easily.
And I can imagine being in a context where the norm is to grab some nets. Let me rephrase that. Not the norm, but the experience and the perception. You correct me if I've got better words, or you add better words. Where there's a culture of this is how things are done, or this is the ceiling of our ideas, knowledge, and experience. And it can be challenging to be in that context. And I think there's contexts that are similar in the domestic world, for example, working with horses and being in a context where pressure and release is a norm versus the information that we know and the colleagues and peers that we have in our industry doing amazing things and the work that we're implementing ourselves. How did it feel at that time? Because I know there's lots of listeners to this show who are going to be in that context, and it can be emotional to navigate that. What were you feeling when you kind of
definitely. It's definitely, it can be emotive. But I think it's, it is a cultural thing, and these things get handed down through the generations at times. And I mean, it's a long known saying now of, we do it this way because it's always been done that way. And sometimes we need to question that. And that's a really perfect example of that. In someone's mind that's not seen the benefits or experienced the benefits or seen how quickly training can progress, they might assume that, this is just quicker and easier for me. It can be, I think it's easy for someone who's empathetic or animal minded to be able to put themselves in the animal's shoes and consider what that animal might prefer in this situation. What approach might the animal prefer? Not everyone automatically thinks that way. And I think that's where, education and inspiration and sharing these stories come in really important. And that was definitely one of my biggest challenges with implementing that training, was to get the buy-in from the keepers. But once they saw the results, it was an absolute game changer. They were seeing, just being able to show them, we did lots of videos, so being able to show them what they thought and seen as normal before, when the gibbons were swinging around and calling a lot and exhibiting signs of stress when they were being moved inside, let's say, for example, versus a video of this really calm, normal behaviour, them just calmly swinging in, taking the time, and not even hesitating to go inside. When you show them that footage back to back, it's really difficult to not see the benefits and not see the difference in that. So yeah, that was my biggest challenge, introducing training to keepers that didn't come from a training background. But as I say, once they experienced it for themselves, I mean, those gibbons now, I went from trying to convince the keeper that I wasn't going to turn it into a circus. To, that keeper not only continued the training after some of this basic introduction stuff, she went on to do a lot of cooperative care stuff. She was doing like thermometer training and body checks and open mouths and all these really cool stuff that, she was completely motivated just by seeing the potential results and how quick you can get results as well. And also how much time it ends up saving them through the day.
That was my next question. Did you find it easy to convince the team? And you've answered that. What about management? Were they already convinced, or did you have to, because I'm assuming initially, even though you save time in the long run, initially there was a little bit of an ask for more resources?
Well, I was so passionate about it that I just offered myself so for free. So in between all of my own job, I would run around all the exhibits that were needing some training or that we had objectives for training. And I would just run from enclosure to enclosure, literally run, like maybe on a lunch break, just run round, do a quick training session and back up to do the sea lions and the penguins. And literally, even if we could just get in 3 10-minute sessions a week, you would see still results from that. And so it really just after a couple of months, we then got the buy-in from the keepers who found ways to implement the training sessions into their already existing timetable for the day. So whenever they were just normally going to feed them, just feed them a slightly different way, Anytime you're going to clean the exhibit, take your little training pouch with you and, do 2 minutes and then carry on with your cleaning. And there was just ways to find the time and implement it to give them the opportunity to see the benefits. But back to your question about management, as I digress again, the management were actually super supportive, very supportive. I didn't have any challenges at all from that regard. They had a chance to see what we had achieved with the sea lions, so I don't think they had doubt, in their mind that it was possible with other species. And they were the ones that you're sending me off to all these lovely conferences and seminars. So, they were quite supportive of the CPD.
I love that passion, and I know a lot of the listeners of the show share in that passion. They would give up their free time because they care so much. I'm wondering, has that ever been a problem for you in terms of burning out and kind of overcommitting yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Because I know that's a big problem that our listeners face as well.
Multiple times.
Multiple times?
Multiple times.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, because I know how hard burnout is and it's horrible. And thank you for talking about it with me and the listeners of the show, because I know that the listeners of the show experience it as well. How do you... We were talking about emotions before we pushed record today, and about vulnerability and bravery. How do you deal with big emotions when management aren't on board, or when the path forward isn't so clear? Like, have you learned to leverage those really strong emotions? And if so, how? Because for a lot of people, it can lead to that burnout. It can lead to that helplessness feeling.
Well, it's definitely evolved. I mean, I've been in the field for 20 years, so how I maybe would have handled it 20 years ago versus now has changed a lot. At that particular park, it was really easy back then because the owner was a great fan of red wine. So you could just take up a bottle of red wine, sweet talk him a little bit, tell him about all these amazing benefits and things we could achieve for him. And, that, so what was it they call it? Lead with a carrot and not with a stick. So yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't get away with that this day and age, going up to a manager and just offering him a bottle of wine to let me train some animals. There was definitely times earlier in my career where it caused a lot of frustration, and that in itself comes with its challenges. Obviously, burnout obviously being one of them. Compassion fatigue, another one. These are all difficult things that we all learn, to manage, whether you're in our field or not. I think it's something that probably everyone experiences at some point in their life, especially if they are passionate about their careers, which I've never met an animal person who's not completely passionate about their career. But yeah, this time, 20 years on, I've found the best approach to be as objective as possible. Sometimes it might feel like that's impossible to do, but if you really want to see the results, that's the approach that you do need to take to be taken seriously, I feel. So it really depends on what it is you are proposing. If it's something like a animal training program, there's lots of research out there available. There's so much video footage now. I mean, back in my day, we didn't have Wi-Fi. I'd feel like we didn't have internet, and we didn't have these smartphones, and we didn't have all the answers at our fingertips. But now we have so much resources available. So utilising all the facts that are already out there, utilising all the benefits and the successes that other people have already achieved. If I had those kind of resources available to me, I probably wouldn't have had to run around on my 1 hour lunch break and do it by myself to try and show this is what's achievable. I could just show them through all the available stuff that's online right now. Just using that objective approach as best as possible, outlining, your plan of how you think that you should approach it, how much time investment it would take, how much financial investment it would take, how many staff it would require, anything else that's really involved in implementing your animal training program. And clearly you're the person who's funding that is going to want to know what the results will be and what the benefits will be to them. So those are all really good things to highlight when you're trying to put your point across and, inspire someone to see things the same way that you do.
Yeah, because I know for us, as you talked about, the outcome for those gibbons is stress. I think you worded it, a kidnapper coming in versus going for a ride in the car. And that's our motivator, but the motivator for our managers might be money or operational costs or always, time. Was that something you leveraged back then in terms of your communication with the team and with management? I know you said management was already brought into it, but even nowadays, is that something you use as a leveraging tool to implement programs? And is it something that you actually collect data on in terms of providing to teams you work with?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. For sure, the financial side of things is probably your biggest leveraging point for whoever's, covering the finances for your program. A lot of the programs that I've been lucky enough to be part of, they have allowed me to expand on their guest experiences, using animal training, and encouraging, the most positive animal-centered approach that you can, but thinking outside the box, all the different ways that you could increase finances for a facility, which not only will finance the training program, but can also go towards other things like facility upgrades, like CPD, like new equipment, extra staff, all the benefits that, a manager might see as that being a really good investment for their facility. And there's ways to work that into a really good welfare program as well.
Another thing you mentioned with the gibbons is that ultimately it was up to the gibbons how fast this project transpired. Mm-hmm. However, for a lot of keepers, management wants the gibbons trained last week. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's at least, why that's not reality. And obviously a manager's not going to say that. That's how it can feel. It can feel like there's a lot of pressure on you to get these programs implemented. Have you found yourself in situations where you've kind of had to communicate your way through that and set expectations? Any advice for the listeners of this show as to how to navigate those situations?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have always seen myself as, normally my job is to be there to provide a service to the business, to the organisation. But my primary priority is always to be the animals advocate. As primary caregivers, I really feel like we are the voices for the animals. They can't speak for themselves, and you do bridge that gap between the animals, what's best for the animals, and the managers and their needs as well. By investing in having, really good trainers or investing in CPD to teach your current keepers to implement really good training techniques, that in itself will move things along faster at the pace that the manager is wanting. Again, going back to that objective approach of proposing and setting realistic expectations of this is how animal behaviour works, and here's the benefits to the animal. At the end of the day, if we take this slower approach, and here's why choice and control is important, and here's why positive reinforcement training is important, then yeah, that's all the types of approaches that I've taken in the past. But I certainly don't shy away from, having difficult conversations about what's best for the animal. Your manager won't always agree with you, and that just is what it is. And sometimes we need to accept that we don't own the zoo, so we don't get to make those decisions sometimes. But we can certainly advocate for the animals. We can certainly propose and try our best, as easy as it can be to sometimes just, shy away from those difficult conversations. They can only say no.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks for sharing all of that. I'm curious, a few more questions. One, I realised it wasn't one, it's more than one. Two more questions on the gibbons, and then I'm interested to move on to your next story. What do you think helped the most with the gibbon problem, and what was the biggest thing you learned from that experience?
So what do you mean by your first question?
You had this problem that you had to overcome. You had these gibbons. You realised that if you went in there as kidnappers with the nets, it was going to be stressful. It was going to cost the zoo more time. It was going to cost the keepers more time. What was the biggest thing that you did in that situation that helped the most move from where you were to where you wanted to get to, and where you did get to? And what was the biggest thing you learned?
The biggest thing that helped was probably having a real solution-focused head. So being able to help the keepers problem solve and how they're able to implement this training program, convince them that it had benefits, that was worth implementing, and how quick and easy we could make it. And I think that's been a key actually to quite a lot of the successful training programs that I've been part of, is being able to really streamline operations, and find solutions to make these training sessions fit in with your already current routine. So that was probably what pushed things forward. Lessons, I would say that my takeaways were, I was amazed at how quick and simple it was to see results, just using those small windows of opportunities just a few times a week. Also how important it is to really inspire stakeholders by using a person-centred approach. We spoke a bit about different people having different motivations for things, and that's what I mean by a person-centred approach. There is many, many benefits, and it's just about choosing what ones you want to highlight to your audience. So for the keepers, it was all about welfare. For the managers, it was all about time saving and reducing risk. So yeah, that's really important, is to get that buy-in for all the people involved, and just seeing the benefits and the positive impact that animal training can bring to all animals under human care. As I say, that was my first real experience of working with multiple species. And so it was just really nice. I don't know why I had these blinkers on for a few years, that just sea lions were capable of all these really cool things. And then my world just really opened up. So it was really a nice lesson that these things they're very transferable.
I lied. I have more questions. and I think that the question, like, what helped out the most, it's hard sometimes, I think, and I find this too, to put myself in the listeners of this show's shoes and know that they're in these positions and they don't always have the skills and they don't always have the solution-focused head. And so I'm asking these questions because I know that the listeners they really struggle with some of this stuff.
Well, I recently was told a really cool story by someone you've also had on the podcast before, Tony Harvey. And he is a legend. He was doing some coaching with my team recently. And one of the stories that he told us was about how they train, what do you call them, like mountainside skiers? What do you call them? I'm sure there's a proper name for them.
Hillside skiers.
You're no better at this game than me. But the skiers that are going down these mountainsides, and there's lots of trees and rocks and obstacles in the way. And the way that the coaches train those types of skiers how to ski and miss the obstacles is to not focus on the obstacles, because when they focus on the obstacles, they're going to crash into the tree, they're going to crash into the rock. But to focus on the path. And if they focus on the path, this is how they can weave in and out through these obstacles. And I thought that was just a really awesome little anecdote, which I will probably use forever now with any teams that I work with, because I think it's a really true story. If you focus on where the possible solutions are, you'll see more of them. If you give energy to the obstacles and spend too much time focusing on them, and we can all, I'm sure, be guilty of having a bit of a vent about them on occasion. But if you spent that time, focusing on the areas where you do have some kind of sphere of influence to shape or change, you will see more of it. And I really believe that. So yeah, thanks for that one, Tony. Little golden nugget.
It reminds me of the idea, the concept. I don't know if there's literature behind this or it's just a popular psychology sentiment of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you focus on what you focus on becomes reality. So if you're focusing on the obstacles, then the obstacles manifest. Well, if you focus on the path manifests. I feel like that is easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, definitely. I never says it was easy. As I mentioned, I have had burnout on many occasions. So no, it's not easy, but what's your alternative? To focus on the obstacles? That's definitely not going to get us anywhere. But I have no doubt in my mind, we all have very different heads on our shoulders. We all think differently. We all learn differently. We all process information differently. And I guess that's one of the benefits of my scatterbrain, is that it is very much a creative scatterbrain. It's very in tuned to problem solving. So I have found it, reasonably easy most of the time. But that's not to say that there's not been a lot of emotive, things going on round about that, or frustrations or blockages. Sometimes you can find a solution, there's another block, find a solution, there's another block. There's only so many times that, that can happen, that you're like, this isn't happening, but you can't just stop there and go, well, there's no point. Apathy is not your friend.
And apathy is one of the fallouts of aversives. And I'm thinking about being in a culture, in a team where there might be a focus on obstacles and ideas might be met with, yeah, but this, that, and the other. Have you worked in a team like that? And what's how do you navigate that space? When it's not just you solving a problem, but it's solving a problem within a culture.
Yeah, I believe, I don't know if I think I said this on the last podcast, but if you get the team right and you get the culture right, everything else is super easy. And for sure, I was not responsible for many of the cultures that I worked within until getting to the Penguin project, because I was in such an early phase. We were able to really create a culture there. So that's the first time that I experienced that as a solution in itself, as creating a nice, healthy working culture. Before that, there was definitely challenges in working with a team. I think any team has its challenges with communications and different ideas. You might not be responsible for the culture outside of your department, the wider organisation that you're working in, but you do have influence over the culture that's within your department and the people that you work side by side on a regular basis. And it's up to you guys to, everybody has to make the effort to work together and grow together as a team. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. Communication being the biggest one. Self-development has been a massive one for me. One of the things that you'll never do for someone else is really down to themselves, is to if there's any kind of ego there holding back, is probably one of the biggest kind of character challenges that I've came across in the field. And definitely in the first couple of years where I was learning, I thought, as I mentioned before, that I knew absolutely everything. And so that ego got built up and very quickly got broken right back down again. And that came through a lot of CPD, so a lot of sort of self-help and self-development books or seminars, and, outside of the animal training and biology and psychology and different things like that I was reading about. Self-development became another kind of passion of mine, I suppose, that I've worked on over the years. And again, I think it's just a natural thing, whether in this field or any other field. You're going to come across lots of different characters, and you will clash with people, and you're not in control of other people, what they do and how they behave and how they interact, but you are in control of how you behave and how you deal with certain situations. And I think over time and over practice, you start learning certain approaches that work with certain individuals. We spoke a bit about having those different characteristics. Everyone thinks slightly differently. Some people are very fact focused, some people are very emotive, some people are very financially focused. Everybody's got very different motivations in life. So just getting to know the people a bit better that you're maybe working with, understanding their motivations, trying to find win-win solutions, things that's going to work for everyone. I don't have all the answers to working with those things. I'm sure I'll still have many more challenges like that moving forward in the future that I'll need to navigate through by myself. But these are some of the things that have helped me develop over the past 20 years. So I hope it can help somebody else. We'll see.
Alanis Morissette comes to mind, because I think it's ironic that we're talking about not focusing on the obstacles, and all my questions are about the obstacles. Because I know the listener of the show, face these challenges. But talking about the path and having that problem-solving mindset, do you have a system for working through challenges? Like, do you have a set of questions that you ask yourself? Do you grab a whiteboard pen, stand in front of a whiteboard, and verbal vomit all your thoughts onto there? What is your? Because I think that creativity is one of the most valuable skills of being a efficient and effective animal trainer. So I'm really curious to hear, what is your creative process?
Well, yeah, it had to be back in the day where there wasn't so much resources available and answers to look to, or, even lots of people sharing their techniques sometimes was quite difficult back 20 years ago. So I don't think that I do have a carbon copy process that I use in every situation, no. I think every situation has been very unique in regards to group dynamics, facility challenges, financial restraints, and all the other things that come along as hurdles for animal training programs. For sure, I try and be as mindful as possible, as proactive as possible. As I say, is getting to know the individuals, what their motivations are. If you can work well with the people that directly impact the work that you're doing, that is probably like 99% of the battle. So invest in those relationships.
I love that you also mentioned that part of your journey has been focusing on self-development. What is a favourite book you've read in terms of helping yourself become a more effective operator?
So some of the books that really helped me is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. That's a really good book if you're wanting to inspire people and put across a really good inspirational message of why you're passionate about what you're passionate about, and find other people's why as well. Why would they want to invest in what it is you're trying to sell them, whatever that might be, to put time into this animal training program, or help support you with a specific behaviour that you're working on. Some other self-developments are The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's a really cool one. I've probably listened to that about 10 times. I think that has a lot of really good points in it that are really transferable to our jobs. Switch, I thought, was a really good one as well, which is how to change things when change is hard. So I listened to that during a time when I was really frustrated, that I was feeling a bit apathetic about not making the change that I was wanting to make. And this is the type of thing that I would look at as a solution focus. What can I do? What is within my sphere of influence? And just learning new approaches and new communication skills. These kind of things, these soft skills, which some people would say, can actually be really helpful and effective.
Yeah, nice. I haven't heard of Switch before. For you, the listener of this show, we do have 2 previous episodes, one on the 7 habits of highly effective people and one on crucial conversations. So I encourage you to go back and listen to those and read those books, because I agree with Nikki. See, Nick, I knew that you were our people. I haven't heard of Switch though, but I have read Simon Sinek's Why. I love that book. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if we're going to have time for 55 stories today, but we might have time for 2. Nikki, can you share another story before we wrap up today? Sorry, I just really wanted to hear your perspective and how you navigate the context that you work in, because I feel like you've been really successful and there's a lot of value for the listeners of this show. So I hope you don't mind that I went off on a tangent compared to what we originally thought this episode might look like. But let's go with a second story and then we'll head towards the end.
Okay, so my other story is with sea lions, one of my favourite species to work with. And it was a group of sea lions that I was asked to come in and reevaluate their operation and their facility. And the group of sea lions, when I arrived, they exhibited quite a lot of signs of real chronic stress. One of them specifically had an extremely bad stereotypical behaviour, one that I'd actually never seen before. We called it flipper sucking, and it looked a little bit like she would sort of sit on her hip with her back flippers sort of wrapped around and around the front of her, and she would insert one of her back flippers in and out of her throat really deeply, repetitively over and over again, and she would do this for the majority of her day. So there was lots and lots of issues, obviously, with this whole situation. So with the sea lions, there's obviously that stress. It causes that build-up of, adrenaline and cortisol hormones, which leads to that increased heart rate and blood pressure and suppression of immune system, among lots of other negative health effects. It can even lead to fatal arrhythmias or heart attacks. Some of the stereotypical behaviour that we've seen from some of the other individuals was like rubbing on the bars or the walls of the enclosure, so they would just sway from side to side, and this would cause like bald spots on their chest. Some of them would chew quite hard down on some solid enclosure furnishings, which just looked like pure frustration a lot of the time. There was like pace sliding, where they would just slide back and forward on the same spot. This impacted group dynamics, it impacted the management of the animals, and it was quite a big health and safety risk to the staff. The flipper sucking behaviour in itself, this caused a lot of ulceration and scarring on the flipper that she would put down her throat. Her nails on her back flippers were quite deformed because of it as well. She was underweight, so she was anorexic. There was calluses from sitting on the same spot that she had been sitting on, and this behaviour had been happening for several years before I had arrived. So there was quite a big thick callus there on her bum where it shouldn't be. There was like open wounds inside her throat from where the nail would catch on her throat, and there was a lot of gastrointestinal issues and diarrhea from all the air that she would push down as well. And it was obviously, as you can imagine, quite traumatic for the public to observe, as well as the staff to have to deal with every day. It wasn't nice to see, and it had been rehearsed for so long. As I said, she would do it for the majority of the day, and you could walk up to her and literally put a fish right in front of her face, and she would just be so hyper-focused on doing this behaviour. So, being able to just implement a training programme wasn't going to be quite so simple, to be able to find this animal's motivation, just to get her to eat, never mind to participate in the training. Some of the immediate implementations that we went for, as well as the behaviour management programme, was to improve the enrichment programme, to have a real good look at the facility, where it was at and where it needed to be species specific for that animal and provide the animal with all of its needs. We also brought researchers on board as well. We had a really great researcher, Eloise, and she did a lot of data collection for us. We really went back to basics with all the animals. So some of this behaviour that we would see, for example, we would need to call them inside. They had sort of divider pens, and we would do presentations with these sea lions as well. But to call them inside, you would go up to the gate, and as soon as they heard you come into the gate, they would all slide really fast towards the gate, and then the keepers would almost have to like open the gate and stand behind it, while they all sort of rushed into their pens, and then they had to rush behind them and close all the gates really quickly, and then the sea lions would start this sliding and rubbing themselves up and down the walls, a lot of vocalizing and stuff like that. So we went really back to basics on management behaviours, just trying to get everybody a little bit more settled and under control. One of the first things that we noticed was that the staff were really busy. They were so busy, so they would rush from A to B all the time. So anytime they were around the sea lions, for example, you'd bring the sea lions inside to the pen room to get them ready for the presentation, and while the staff, which was a really small team with a reasonable sized presentation to put together, and including sort of crowd control and everything inside the building, preparing all the food for the show, making sure the stage was all set up, making sure the water quality was all right. There was lots and lots of different little jobs that needed to be done. And so that rushing was sort of adding to that energy in the room. So one of the first things we did was just get them to slow down, even if it was only when they were walking past the sea lions. If they were running up to a door, then they just had to slow down, walk through the pen room nice and slowly. And that in itself caused quite a good effect on reducing that, sort of stressy looking behaviour that we were seeing in the pen rooms. We built in a lot of management solutions, so things like name recognition and stationing. So we would station all the animals outside, and we would just call in the one that we needed for the presentation and leave all the others outside. So that helped us to manage, the health and safety side of it, and reduce us having to bring the animals in when they didn't necessarily need to come in. We proposed facility upgrades, so just to increase the size, which in itself would, increase the space that the animals had, and reduce all that sort of, slamming into each other and being in each other's space all the time. That was also sort of came hand in hand with a research proposal as well. So we looked at the placement of that behaviour that we were seeing, the flipper sucking behaviour. So we looked at the placement, where she was doing it, the duration she was doing it, the activities she was exhibiting pre and post flipper sucking. We looked for patterns and triggers. We looked back over years and years of records to try and find clues as to why it started in the first place. The research findings suggest that there was no real way of knowing why it started in the first place. So trying to figure out the function was going to be a challenge. It was likely to be some sort of coping mechanism. So as I mentioned, as part of that, there was a proposal to improve the environment to a size and a design that was fit for purpose. Given the space, it would improve the group dynamics and increase the species-specific behaviour, and in the hope that it would decrease the stereotypes that we were seeing. As I mentioned, that sea lion that was flipper sucking, she wouldn't even take a fish from her hand. So we looked into as much research as was available out there around stereotypical behaviours of oral fixations. We found quite a bit of stuff with polar bears, and they had used, it was actually a mild antidepressant that they used to just help support the physical and the mental recovery from what was going on. So that seemed to just really calm things down a lot. We've seen a really quick response from that. And that was just as a tool, a preliminary tool to give us the opportunity to then implement the training, and implement all the other, foundations that we felt were needed to improve some of these behaviours that we were seeing.
I'm super relieved, so happy, and really, really proud to say that thanks to research and obviously all the hard work from the amazing team around these animals, our researcher Eloise Cartnard and senior trainer Erin MacArthur, who's such a talented trainer with a wealth of ideas and inspiration, and of course all the other staff, volunteers and researchers involved, because it really does take a village sometimes. And with this particular case study, it did take the entire village. But we got these sea lions and exhibit redesigned. They're in a much more settled group dynamic now, and our flipper sucker that was heading toward euthanasia hasn't exhibited the behaviour since, and it's now a thriving, happy, healthy animal, exhibiting lots of lovely natural sea lion behaviours.
Wow, that's a stressful situation to walk into. I can imagine that. And thinking about that, needing a broad and vast knowledge and experience base, that's one of those challenges you come into and you're like, well, this is definitely going to pull on everything that I have. But really interesting to learn about getting it sounds like just getting the basics right, not necessarily jumping to your training toolkit, but making sure that the needs of this animal and this group of animals and human learners were taken care of in that context.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely getting the basics right. That in itself is a lesson, I think, for every single training program I've ever been part of. So for sure, always refer to Susan Friedman's humane hierarchy as a starting point for any behaviour problem that you're seeing. And it was certainly one of my first go-tos, especially when I see any stereotypical behaviour. And yeah, not knowing or not experiencing this specific behaviour before, not knowing too much, I hadn't heard of this happening in other facilities. Probably we're still in a day and age where culturally we aren't always open to some of these things that do go on. I think that we're getting better at it, and we see the benefits of talking about it. When I actually done a presentation at one of the Biaza Seal and Sea Lion workshops on it, and when I mentioned it and I showed the videos, there was actually other people that came up to me afterwards and they were like, we're experiencing this right now, or we've seen it in the past. And just from starting that conversation, a lot more tends to come out of the woodwork. I don't think people always feel safe to have those conversations, so I guess that's probably another area to focus on when you are trying to explore these sensitive subjects, is to create a safe space for that to happen, and obviously making sure that you're not judgmental about it. The trainer themselves are unlikely the sole cause of any major behaviour issue that's happened. And I think sometimes our community can be really quick to point fingers when things are going wrong or things aren't quite, as advanced as they could be. So yeah, just being, I guess, sympathetic to people that have found themselves in those situations. For all you know, they could be running themselves into the ground trying to fix it.
Absolutely. Feel that 9.9 times out of 10, everyone wants the same thing, and that is to what's best for the animal. But we're all coming at it with our own learning history and knowledge and experience. And part of that learning history is our experience with getting vulnerable and sharing things like this with that fear of judgment.
Definitely.
So you being an example here today on this podcast, I'm sure is powerful for people listening to this episode. Sadly, because of all my questions, that does bring us to the end. But I have one more, and I'm curious to hear, Nick, if you were to take us into the future now and share what you want to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years in our industry, what would that look like?
Well, I'd like to see lots of applications flying in from your wonderful listeners that might like to come and volunteer at Guide Dogs and help support our puppy raising programme. So please look on our website if you would like to do that, because having behaviourists on board would just be an absolute dream. So have a little check out there. But on a wider note, I'd like to see animal training and behaviour becoming a fundamental part of animal welfare programs in zoos and aquariums. That was a direction that I truly believed that we were going in when I first started 20 years ago. And I don't quite feel that we're there yet, but people on the front line are really trying. There's lots of really cool CPD programs available out there. I know that BIAZA has now implemented a new animal training program, which is fabulous. So massive kudos to the team that managed to pull that together. Seeing more of that, I would love to. Love to just see more frontline staff receive more support from their leaders for their animal training programs, and recognise the benefits of them. I don't expect animal training behaviour programs to be number one priority, and nor should it be, but it shouldn't be classed as like a luxury or only provided if there's time to provide it. It really is an essential part of animal care, and it should be up there under serious considerations with, your vet work, your nutrition, your environment, all the social components that are, all come hand in hand with a good animal care regime. So a quality welfare and behaviour programme is vital to helping any animal facility take care of their charges. The animals under human care benefit really greatly by just proactively and intentionally learning how to cooperate with their own care and management using positive reinforcement techniques. And I mean, a really good quote that I would love to use is from Ken Ramirez, and it's specific to working with smaller animals. And I used this quote for my presentation that I did at IMATA in Las Vegas about the penguins, which I'll share a link with you, Ryan, so you can share with the listeners if they're interested. But I thought this is a really amazing point and really inspirational. And it's while it's understandable that the training of large or dangerous animals to assist in husbandry behaviours was a priority for trainers, it was not always as clear for small animals like penguins. But just because a small animal is easier to restrain doesn't make the procedure any less stressful for that animal. If we have the knowledge and the skill to teach an animal to cooperate in their own care, then don't they all deserve that effort and that level of care, no matter their size? So if there was a takeaway message, then I would love it to be that one, just because they're small and you can catch them up and you can probably do things quicker in the moment, just consider the impact that it can have and how quick and easy a training program can, help move that forward in a slightly better approach.
Rather than be a kidnapper, give them
rather than be a
cruising ride in the
kidnapper.
car.
Yeah, just invite them into the car, let them know it's going to be a nice transport over. Nobody's going to traumatise you.
I've got this great visualization of a car full of gibbons driving around. Yeah.
A lovely image to send you off with, Ryan.
Just before we do a officially wrap up, I know we did this last episode, but can you just remind everyone listening where they can go online to find out more about you, what you do, and get in touch?
Yeah, of course. So I do have a website. It's www.animaltrainingtoolkit.co.uk. We're also on Facebook and I'm on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to get in touch, you're more than welcome to. I'm always happy to talk shop, as they say. So yeah, I absolutely love talking training. By all means, ping me over a message. Or if you're thinking of implementing an animal training program in your zoo, then think of me, because I would love to come and help you out with it.
Fantastic. And we will, of course, link to all of this in the show notes as well. Nikki, this has been so much fun from myself and on behalf of everyone listening. We really appreciate you taking the time again to come and hang out with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behaviour geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.